The Texas federal courthouse in downtown Houston looked more like a fortress than a place where justice was served. Thick marble walls, cold fluorescent lights, armed security stationed every 20 feet. But Cassidy Eldridge didn't flinch as she walked through the double doors, wrists cuffed, chin raised just enough to show she wasn't here to beg. She was 22, slim, steady, and calm in a way that unsettled people who expected fear. Her hair was pulled into a neat bun, and the navy blue prison-issue jumpsuit did little to dim the quiet fire in her eyes. She didn't look dangerous, but that wasn't the point today. The point was to make her seem dangerous. The courtroom was already buzzing when she entered. Reporters, observers, law students curious about the girl who punched a cop. A white-haired bailiff pulled the door shut behind her with a bang. Phones were off, pens ready. The show was about to begin. Judge Ronald Keene barely looked up from his bench. He was in his 60s, jowly, known for his impatience with emotional defendants. Cassidy had read about him. He'd once sentenced a teenager to 6 months for talking back. Today he would preside over her preliminary hearing. "Ms. Eldridge," he said dryly, flipping through a folder, "I take it your public defender will be handling your response." Cassidy didn't answer. Seated nearby, her assigned attorney, a nervous man named Donnelly, half rose and spoke. "Yes, Your Honor, we request." Cassidy turned her head. "I'll represent myself." The courtroom went still. Even the stenographer looked up. Judge Keene removed his glasses and stared down at her. "Excuse me?" Cassidy's voice didn't waver. "I said I'll be representing myself." The judge chuckled. "You're a third-year law student, not an attorney." "That's true," she replied. "But under Ferretta v. California, I have the constitutional right to self-representation. Unless, of course, the court wants to add violation of due process to the list of things it's already botching." A low ripple spread across the gallery. Keene's eyes narrowed. "Very well, but don't expect any special treatment." "I wouldn't dream of it." To the left, the prosecutor assistant U.S. Attorney Blake Renshaw leaned back in his chair, smirking. Slick suit, Harvard Law, known for tough talk and even tougher sentencing recommendations. He looked at Cassidy like he already had the victory speech written. As the judge called the hearing to order, Renshaw stood, confident and condescending. "Your Honor, the government's case is simple. Ms. Eldridge physically assaulted Officer John Wexler during a lawful crowd control procedure on March 17th. We have a sworn statement, 2 partial videos, and a police report. She incited others to violence? Oh, no. She struck a federal officer. There is no ambiguity." He turned and smiled at Cassidy. Open and shut, but Cassidy didn't blink, didn't twitch. She just tilted her head slightly, like she'd seen this performance before, because she had. And the real trial hadn't even started yet. Prosecutor Blake Renshaw adjusted his tie, then stepped forward with all the confidence of a man who had never lost a case he cared about. The kind of man who spoke not to convince, but to perform. For the judge, for the press, for himself. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court," he began, though no jury had been seated yet. "The defendant before you, Ms. Cassidy Eldridge, a third-year law student at Houston Southern University, has been charged with a federal offense, assaulting a peace officer in the line of duty." He paused, letting that phrase sink in, assaulting a peace officer. In the early evening of March 17th, during an unauthorized protest outside the Wortham Theater Center, Officer John Wexler was deployed for crowd control. Body cam footage and witness accounts placed Ms. Eldridge at the front of the crowd. Not only did she engage in verbal provocation, but she also threw a plastic water bottle full, not empty, striking Officer Wexler in the chest. Seconds later, she lunged forward, shouting profanities, and struck him again with her hand. Renshaw turned toward Cassidy with a smirk. The officer required medical attention. He filed a formal report. His body cam caught the moment of impact, and Ms. Eldridge was arrested at the scene. A few people in the gallery nodded, others scribbled notes. From where Cassidy sat, she could see their faces, half intrigued, half smug. Renshaw paced slowly. "The defense may argue context. They may claim the footage doesn't tell the whole story. But let's be honest, when someone assaults a federal officer, that context doesn't matter. We don't excuse assault just because someone's angry, or emotional, or frustrated with the world." He held up a glossy still frame. Cassidy, mid-shout, her mouth wide open, her hand raised, frozen in motion like an angry statue. "This is not the face of peaceful protest," Renshaw said, voice tightening. "It's the face of aggression, of lawlessness." Cassidy studied the image without flinching. Keene gave a half nod, flipping the page of his legal pad. "Do you have the officer's statement?" "Yes, Your Honor," Renshaw replied, handing over a document. "Signed and notarized. Officer Wexler confirms physical contact, describes being struck, and identifies Ms. Eldridge as the aggressor. We also have footage from a bystander's phone, which captures the same moment from a different angle." "Was that footage reviewed by a digital forensic analyst?" Judge Keene asked. Renshaw smiled. "Yes, sir. Verified for authenticity. No alterations." The judge scribbled something. The bailiff stood beside him like a statue. From across the courtroom, Cassidy heard soft chuckles. A whisper. "She really thought she could defend herself?" Another. "She's gonna get eaten alive." Cassidy leaned back slightly in her chair. Still calm, still calculating. She wasn't here to interrupt. Not yet. Renshaw wasn't done. He returned to his table and retrieved a small, black USB drive. "We request the court to admit the following evidence into record video exhibits A and B, still images C through E, and Officer Wexler's written testimony." Judge Keene motioned to the clerk. "Admitted." Then he looked at Cassidy. "Ms. Eldridge, would you like to respond now, or wait until the prosecution finishes their presentation?" Cassidy slowly stood, her voice cool as glass. "I'll respond, Your Honor, but not yet. Let them finish building the story." Renshaw scoffed. "It's not a story, it's the truth." Cassidy tilted her head. "Just a little. Then you shouldn't be afraid if I take my time with it." The gallery murmured again. Keene raised an eyebrow, because for the first time, someone in the room realized Cassidy might actually know exactly what she's doing. Cassidy stepped forward slowly, not with swagger, but with a calculated stillness, like a chess player reaching for a piece she'd known she would move all along. The room quieted. Even Judge Keene paused mid-scribble, his pen hovering above the legal pad. "Your Honor," Cassidy began, her voice low but unmistakably steady, "the prosecution just admitted video exhibit A body cam footage from Officer Wexler. May I ask the timestamp of that footage?" Renshaw blinked. "It begins at 7:42 p.m. the moment Ms. Eldridge appeared on camera." "And it ends?" Cassidy asked. "Roughly 7:52 p.m., just after the alleged incident." Cassidy nodded slowly. "Interesting, because the protest began at 7 o'clock. Are we to believe that the officer's body cam was not recording for the first 42 minutes? Renshaw's jaw tightened. "There may have been technical issues." "Or selective editing," Cassidy countered, "which would be a violation of Federal Evidence Protocol Rule 106 of the Federal Rules of Evidence, to be exact. When a party introduces part of a recorded statement, the opposing party may require the rest be introduced for context." The judge looked up. Cassidy didn't stop. "I formally request the court subpoena the full body cam footage from 7:00 to 7:52, including any gaps." Renshaw stepped forward. "Your Honor, the footage submitted is the relevant portion." "I'm not asking for what you think is relevant," Cassidy said. "I'm asking for the truth. Unless, of course, the prosecution is afraid of context." That landed harder than she expected. Someone in the gallery murmured. Renshaw's face reddened. Judge Keene adjusted his glasses. "The court will review the full footage once it's available. Continue." Cassidy gave a short nod, then pulled a folded document from her folder and walked toward the evidence screen. "This is a screenshot from Exhibit B," she said, "the bystander video the prosecution submitted. It shows me with my hand raised yes, but notice the background." She zoomed in. Behind her, a man in a red hoodie is mid-motion, his arm extended toward Officer Wexler. "The man in the red hoodie is not me," Cassidy said flatly. "He threw the bottle. He shouted. I turned around when I heard the noise, and that's when the image was captured. The still frame shows me reacting, not attacking." Keene leaned forward. "And yet," Cassidy continued, "no effort was made to identify the red hoodie man. No stills, no questions. Because they found me nearby, and that was close enough." She stepped away from the screen. "I'm being prosecuted for a headline, not a crime. Because I was the law student with a megaphone earlier that night. Because I spoke about accountability, and when things got loud and messy, someone in uniform saw a black woman with confidence and assumed guilt. There it was. No one in the courtroom laughed now, not the bailiff, not the gallery, not even Renshaw. Cassidy's eyes moved to the judge. I have a list of 10 witnesses who were present that night. None of them have been contacted by the prosecution. 4 recorded videos. 2 said I pulled them away from the altercation. All of that was left out of the state's narrative. She paused, letting the silence stretch. This isn't just sloppy work, it's strategic omission. Judge Keene stared at her. Cassidy returned to her table. Renshaw remained frozen for a beat, unsure whether to smile, speak, or shout. And that was the problem. Because for the first time, the courtroom wasn't sure who the professional was and who wasn't. Cassidy stood again, her fingertips grazing the edge of the defense table as she looked directly at Judge Keene. Your Honor, she said, before I proceed with my witness list, I'd like to address a detail in the prosecution's core narrative, specifically the police report submitted by Officer Wexler. Keene motioned for her to continue. Renshaw didn't object, but his eyes narrowed, watching. Cassidy held up a printed page. This is the original incident report, filed 48 minutes after my arrest. In it, Officer Wexler states he was struck at 7:49 p.m., 3 minutes before my arrest. But here's the problem. She stepped toward the screen again and tapped a timestamp. The body cam footage, Exhibit A, shows Officer Wexler radioing in the arrest at exactly 7:45 p.m., not 7:52 as stated earlier. He says, quote, I have her in custody, possible assault suspect. She turned to the courtroom. So, which is it? Did the assault happen at 7:49? Or was I already arrested by then? Keene glanced over his glasses again. Renshaw shifted in his seat, then muttered, probably a typo. Cassidy didn't miss a beat. A typo on an official federal report? That's interesting, because there's more. She opened another folder. According to departmental procedure, any officer involved in a use of force incident must complete Form 3-12U, known as a tactical incident evaluation, within 12 hours of the event. I submitted a FOIA request to the Houston Police Department, and surprised no such form was filed by Officer Wexler. None exists, not even a draft. That hit hard. Keene visibly stiffened. I also requested the internal chain of custody logs for the body cam footage. The file was copied, edited, to be specific, by a technician named Joel Fairbanks 3 days after my arrest, before the evidence was submitted to the court. I subpoenaed his work records. The copy of the video marked Final XAMP4 was exported at 3:12 p.m. on March 20th, but a raw, uncut version labeled Initial Capture Raw.move was created on March 17th and has never been turned over. The courtroom shifted. A ripple of tension passed through the gallery like a slow-moving wave. Cassidy met Renshaw's eyes. If the prosecution has nothing to hide, why wasn't the uncut file submitted? Renshaw stood. Objection, she's speculating. No, Cassidy said, locking eyes with the judge. I'm highlighting a pattern. Inconsistencies in timestamps, missing forms, edited video, witnesses ignored, and now evidence withheld. She turned back to the bench. Your Honor, I formally move that the court compel the release of the uncut footage and initiate an inquiry into the chain of custody for Exhibit A. Judge Keene didn't answer immediately. He rubbed the side of his temple with a slow, circular motion, the same way he might after a long, losing chess game. Finally, he looked at Renshaw. Mr. Renshaw, any reason this raw footage wasn't included in your filings? Renshaw hesitated. Then, I'll have to check with the evidence team. That was all Cassidy needed. She turned slightly toward the gallery, not to show off, but to let them see. This wasn't luck. This wasn't theatrics. This was the truth, cutting through the marble and politics like a scalpel. Cassidy exhaled softly. She had just placed the first crack in a wall that had held for far too long, and it was only beginning to crumble. Cassidy's hands moved deliberately now. No more calculated pauses. No more letting the prosecution catch their breath. The rhythm of the courtroom had shifted, and everyone knew it, even the judge. She pulled a stapled packet from her folder and held it up. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a series of emails and internal memos obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request filed 2 weeks after my arrest. Renshaw barely looked up. Irrelevant communications, Cassidy cut in. Let me finish. She turned toward the bench, her tone calm but firm. These emails were sent between Officer John Wexler, Sergeant Brent Holloway, and HPD evidence tech Joel Fairbanks. The date, March 18th. The subject line, footage review, suspect ID. The judge leaned forward slightly. Cassidy continued. In one of those emails written at 10:37 a.m., Sergeant Holloway writes, and I quote, Wexler says the female student in cuffs didn't match the kid who threw the bottle. That one was a male white red hoodie. But we've already filed the report, so just keep the current version for now. If it escalates, we'll revise. A hush fell over the courtroom, like someone had hit mute on the entire room. Cassidy let the words hang in the air before walking to the evidence screen. Let's revisit the bystander video again, she said, tapping the screen. That red hoodie appears briefly at timestamp 0014. The individual is clearly white, male, taller than me, and nowhere near me when Officer Wexler makes his move. She paused. But I was the one he handcuffed. Why? She looked at Renshaw. He didn't answer. Cassidy raised her voice, not to shout, but to reach every corner of the room. Because I was the one holding the mic 10 minutes earlier. Because I was the one shouting about civil liberties and accountability. Because I was the loudest black girl in the crowd, and that made me convenient. Renshaw stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. She's editorializing. She's exposing your case, Judge Keene said quietly, not even looking at him. Cassidy turned back to the bench. I also have a sworn statement from another officer, Officer Dana Kessler, who was stationed on the opposite side of the crowd that night. She confirmed seeing another individual throw the water bottle. Her report was filed but not submitted by the prosecution. She stepped back. It was buried, just like everything else that didn't fit their version of events. The judge's pen had stopped moving. He was just staring at the documents in his hands. Renshaw shuffled his papers, but nothing in his stack could erase the sinking reality settling over him now. His case wasn't falling apart. It had never been solid to begin with, just polished. Cassidy returned to her table. This isn't justice, Your Honor. This is strategy, and I'm not here to play along. The silence returned thicker than before, tense, uncomfortable, but honest. Keene let out a breath, slow and heavy. This court will take a short recess while I review the newly submitted documents. The gavel came down, not with authority, but resignation. Cassidy sat, her breathing steady, her eyes never left the bench. Because this wasn't just a turning point. This was proof that even when the truth is buried deep, if you dig with enough precision, it bleeds. The courtroom reconvened 30 minutes later, but the air felt different now, heavier. Like something sacred was about to be decided, not by tradition or rank, but by raw, undeniable truth. Judge Keene looked up as everyone settled in. His expression had changed. The condescension was gone. In its place, weariness and maybe a trace of regret. Before we continue, he began, the court has reviewed the full-length, unedited body cam footage, as well as the email chain and supplemental witness reports submitted by Ms. Eldridge. He looked at Renshaw. Would the prosecution like to address any of these materials before I issue a ruling? Renshaw stood, his tone clipped. The prosecution acknowledges certain discrepancies in the timeline. We intend to conduct an internal review. Cassidy didn't even blink. She knew what internal review meant. A quiet burial, a half-hearted memo, a shrug. Keene turned to her. Ms. Eldridge, do you have anything further before I make a determination? She rose slowly. Only this, Your Honor. The full video shows me stepping between the man in the red hoodie and Officer Wexler. I placed my arm out to block a second bottle from being thrown. That's the moment captured in the still frame they used against me. She let the silence stretch. I wasn't attacking anyone. I was stopping something worse. But that didn't fit the version they needed. The judge nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion. Then he spoke the words that everyone in the room would remember. This case never should have reached my courtroom. He turned to the clerk. Strike the charges from the record. The court finds no probable cause to proceed. Case dismissed. A collective exhale swept through the gallery. Somewhere near the back, someone whispered, Damn. Cassidy didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just closed her binder, packed it slowly, and stood tall. As the judge rose to leave, he paused. Then, without looking at Renshaw, he said quietly, "Let this be a reminder. The courtroom isn't a stage. It's a mirror, and today, we all saw our reflection." He exited without another word. Reporters scrambled, pens scratched paper, microphones were raised before Cassidy even left her seat. But she didn't speak. Not yet. Outside, the sun had dropped low, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Cassidy walked out slowly, flanked by people who hours ago had barely looked at her. Now they watched her like something had shifted. Because it had. This wasn't just a legal win, it was something deeper. A quiet disruption. A system, caught in the act of being itself. And one young woman, calm, brilliant, and unshaken, had forced it to see. Cassidy descended the courthouse steps into a sea of flashing cameras and outstretched microphones. Journalists shouted over each other, "Cassidy, did you know the case would be dropped? Are you planning to sue the city? Will you become a civil rights attorney?" But she didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. Her mother stood at the bottom of the steps, arms crossed, eyes wide with a mix of awe and restrained emotion. Denise Eldridge, paralegal for over 2 decades, had always been the fire behind her daughter's focus. But even she hadn't expected this. Cassidy walked straight into her arms. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then quietly, Denise whispered, "You really did it." Cassidy exhaled against her mother's shoulder. "Had to." Denise pulled back, brushing a tear quickly. "You scared me half to death." Cassidy smiled. "You taught me everything I needed." Across the street, a black sedan pulled away from the courthouse entrance. Through the tinted window, Judge Keene watched in silence. His eyes weren't hard anymore, just distant, reflective. For him, this had been just another day. Until it wasn't. He hadn't expected to be challenged. He certainly hadn't expected to be wrong. And yet, he had been, and Cassidy had forced him to see it. 2 weeks later, Cassidy stood on a small stage at her university's law school auditorium. The room was packed, not because of a speaker series or final exam review, but because she was speaking. No longer in a jumpsuit, now in a crisp navy blazer, her natural curls free and unapologetic. The silence in the room was electric as she began. "I didn't win because I was smarter or louder. I won because I knew what they hoped I didn't, that the law can be used against you or by you." She paused, letting the words settle. They picked the wrong one that day. But what about the ones who never get a second look, the ones who get erased before they can even speak? She looked at the rows of students, some future prosecutors, some defense attorneys, some unsure of who they'd become. Justice doesn't happen on accident. It happens when we force it to. When we refuse to sit down, even when the room tells us we don't belong. A beat of silence. Then, applause. Long, rising, undeniable. Because Cassidy Eldridge hadn't just walked out of court that day. She walked into her future. And from now on, she wouldn't be on trial. She'd be leading the fight.